Welcome back to another episode. This time I have Cera Byer on the podcast, and we're going to be talking about codependency and fantasy addiction, which I'm really excited. There's so much that comes to mind immediately for myself and my own life, just hearing those words alone when we decided this was the topic. But she also has a lot to say about this. So, Cera, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. We're recording this for anyone listening later in the future, time travelers. We're recording this on the day of the total solar eclipse. So I think this is a great time to talk about this because this portal of the eclipse is about ending cycles. And so if this signals the end for someone of unhealthy relational patterns in your life and stepping into a new era of more healthy relating, then that's a beautiful thing.
I love that. The divine timing of it. And also, we were just talking before we recorded, it's a miracle if this does air, right? With all of the stuff happening right now, technology, it's lining up. Here we are. So I'm really excited to dive in. Well, let me introduce Cera. She's a certified life coach and business coach. She's a dancer, embodiment coach, and movement coach. She's the CEO of Intuitive Edge Coaching and Intuitive Edge Creative, based in Los Angeles, California. Cera is dedicated to helping artists, creatives, and spiritual practitioners move anything that keeps them in their own way. She's committed to helping people get their brilliant, life-changing work out of their heads and into the world where it can benefit the collective. She firmly believes that creative, talented people don't need a backup plan or day job, despite what we've been told. We could create security and stability for ourselves, and that shifting wealth into the hands of the healers, helpers, and artists is the best chance that we have to reshape society and heal the world. So, boom, Cera, powerful woman, powerful bio. I'm so happy you're here. Tell us, when you hear, right, this topic, codependency and fantasy addiction, let's start with codependency. And I like to start just high level, Dummies 101 definition. How do you define codependency?
I get so excited to talk about this because I've been told by many people that the way that I break this down is different than what they've heard before. And what is that so many more people are codependent than know that they are codependent because of how we hear it talked about. So I think usually when people hear codependency, they're thinking about like alcoholics and addicts and enabling, right? They're thinking, oh, like you're the parent of someone who has an addiction and you're paying their bills for them and bailing them out and getting them out of trouble and like helping them and taking care of them. Or, you are in a physically abusive relationship and you are, unable to leave. But codependency is a mode of nervous system regulation
Hmm.
where we try to regulate our own nervous systems by controlling other people's emotions and reactions. And I've never heard anyone else describe it that way, but that's what it is. And so if you grew up, first of all, I want to say anyone who grew up in a home with alcoholism, addiction, abuse, abandonment, which is like 90% of the population, as far as I can tell, has some codependent processing. And I also want to be clear that when I say abandonment to a child, that can mean a parent who dies, a parent who's in the military, a parent who's incarcerated, a parent who's gone a lot for work. Like as children, we don't have the ability to process, why is my parent not here? We perceive unsafety due to abandonment. And so I like to point that out because I think it's important that we know that this is just like a predictable outcome of really common situations for most of our peers. And so when we think of it as we're a child and our survival literally depends on our caregivers, we need our caregivers to be in a good mood, to be safe, to be regulated, to be available, to feed us, to respond to our emotional needs. It is a very logical survival strategy then to be able to tap into and understand what your caregiver's moods are and to do anything you can to try to shift their mood if you see them in a bad mood. So if you have a parent who's drinking, you have a parent who's even just like they come home and they're having a bad day from work, and you're the kid who's like, going to tell a lot of jokes and try, right? Like you're performing, I got straight A's, right? I cleaned my room. I'm doing things to try to shift this person's mood to create safety for myself because my body says I'm not safe if you're not okay. So then we get into adulthood and we have that same process running where other people being upset, being angry, being sad, being frustrated, being disappointed literally feels unsafe in our body. And so we're trying to fix things for them or solve their problems for them or quote unquote help. We usually think of ourselves as really selfless and really giving, but we're actually, I hate to say manipulative because it's not intentional, but we're trying to manipulate other people's moods to create safety for ourselves. So
Mm-hmm.
I really think of codependency as a nervous system regulation strategy. And we can become addicted to other people's problems and feelings. Like I need to be super involved in what you have going on because it's how I take care of myself.
I love, love, love this so much. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat it. A mode of nervous system regulation where we're trying to regulate our own nervous system by managing other people's reactions. I'm not safe if you're not okay. It sounds like a fawn response to me, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I think it is like an extreme form of fawning.
Extreme form of fawning, but such a generous interpretation without any of the shame or judgment that can typically come with that word codependency. I remember when I first stumbled upon that word, it was the book Codependent No More. And at the time, it was really helpful because it was putting words and language to something I was experiencing in my marriage that I didn't have language for. And I do remember feeling seen and being like, oh my God, there's a word for this. And there's other people who go through this. I'm not crazy. There was validation. And for years, I was diving into codependency books and being like, this is me. Going to Codependency Anonymous, had my own sponsor, did the 12-step program for codependency. And it helped me for a time until I feel like it reached this expiration date where that label all of a sudden started to feel very limiting and pretty shaming for me. It didn't start out that way, but I equated it with needy, or small, or, not confident, low self-worth. And I had reached this place where I'm like, I don't really want to call myself codependent anymore. I feel like I'm limiting myself by this box I'm putting myself in. And so I remember dropping the term. And all that to say, just hearing your definition, I love this because it's like we don't have to drop the term. We just have to know how we're defining it and do it in a way that really feels aligned and feels like, yes, we get to feel seen and radically accepted in what our experience is without any shame. But also, it's not something that's so limiting where it's like, this is what I'm assigned and I can't step out of this or break out of this at all.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I did CODA too, and I think that CODA work was incredibly valuable for me, and like step work was super valuable for me. And putting it through the lens of addiction was very valuable to me. And it also gave me language, in my healing process when I was dating to be able to like, I would sit people down and have a talk with them as though I were in AA, right? Like about alcohol. Like I'm an addict, and here's how that functions for me in relationships. Like if you are not actively taking care of your side of the emotional street, that threatens my sobriety because I will start to feel wobbly in my safety in our relationship. And I will step in and start trying to manage things for you and understanding my like red light, yellow light, and green light behaviors and all that stuff. But when I started to really understand this as a nervous system regulation strategy, I think it's right that you would stop identifying as a codependent when you no longer need to regulate yourself through other people's emotions. And the 12-step language is like you're a lifer, right? Like this is just what you are forever, right? Alcoholics are always alcoholics, even when they're sober. And I think that there's some ways that that's valuable, and there's other ways that it's really limiting. Because I do believe that when you've done this is just something I believe overall. I think for a lot of people in personal development and healing, for a long time, our wounds and our trauma are our identity. And then we get onto our healing journey, and our healing journey is our identity. But the thing about healing is there's supposed to be an after, right? At some, like, there will always be growth work to do. But like if you break your arm, you don't wear a cast forever. You wear the cast while the bone is healing, and then you have full use of your arm and you're fine. I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in the like, there's something wrong with me and working on this problem is who I am. And to me, I would like there to be like a no, I addressed this problem. And now this problem is actually better. And I can focus on other things in my life. And the resources that used to go into managing this problem are now freed up for my creativity and my growth and my progress and the things I want to do rather than like managing symptoms of PTSD from my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it makes sense if you reach a point in your healing where you find I have healthy boundaries, I understand where I end and other people begin, I understand where my responsibilities end and other people begin, I am a large enough container to sit, to genuinely hold space. And this was a big thing for me in my healing as somebody who also works in personal development. I couldn't do the work that I'm doing and not be a big enough container to sit with other people's unpleasant emotions without needing to fix them for me to be safe. That makes me an unqualified healer. I need to be able to sit with someone when they're sad, when they're scared, and just be with them and be like, I am safe in my body to be present for your big feelings. And once you have that, you literally are no longer dependent because you are not trying to regulate yourself through other people's emotions. So the label no longer applies. And I do believe it's something you can heal from.
I love that so much. And I also love that you had pointed out manipulation. And you said, I hate to say that word because it's not intentional, but that's what we are doing, attempting to manipulate their moods. And it's a survival mechanism. It's wise, like in and of itself, that we're so adaptable, that our nervous systems are so working properly that it can know how to go into a mode like that in order to survive situations that feel unsafe. If you bring it to the bear example, like if a bear is attacking me, a fawn response or a codependent response or a manipulative response might just be like, here, I have a fish. Like, don't kill me. Here's a little fishy, a little snack. So you can run the hell away. So when we're triggered, when our emotional wounds or our abandonment wounds are triggered, our body doesn't know the difference between that or a bear in our presence. So if we can stop judging ourselves and, if that label does bring any shame, stop putting that on ourselves and be like, oh, this is actually like my nervous system is working. There's wisdom in this that I can think to operate in this way. But where the problem lies is when it reaches its expiration date, when we're tired of surviving, we're ready to thrive again. We don't want to be in that energy and mode for forever. And when it's not bringing us the kind of intimacy and connection that we desire, because there's absolutely no connection and intimacy when it's constant, right? Survival in codependency and manipulation. So I can imagine people listening even right now might be like, hands raised, I identify like with all of this. This is me. So what should I do? Should I do codependency anonymous? What is the answer? What do you think is the best route for healing?
I think the best route for healing is the one that you're going to stick with. Which is also what I think is the best route for marketing, the best social media platform to be on, right? Like the one that's right for you. There are a lot of options, right? So like I love working with people on healing this. So if you wanted to do one-on-one work with me, with somebody, like get in a group with someone like Becky, if you wanted to do coaching, if you do go the therapy route to find a trauma-informed codependency aware therapist, because I was in therapy for years and years and years before I had a therapist who clocked codependence and love addiction in me, and she was somebody who had an addiction background in her therapy work. And it was really revelatory that all the therapists I had been with before just didn't have that awareness and that training. Going the route of like EMDR also, and doing some like actual like trauma healing on some of your original wounds can be really helpful. There's a guy named Brent Charlton who has a course available. His work is called Corrections. I found his work to be really helpful. So there's just like there's tons of things out there. And I think that, as with everything, there's like a cattail showing up. Um, Finding the thing that's right for you may require a little trial and error. I wish I could say there's like one absolute best right answer, but for some people, like Coda and 12 step is like a hard no, they don't like it. I also know, like, I was lucky because I was in the Bay Area, and so I was able to find some non-religious and non-denominational 12-step programs, and sometimes in some areas they can be very religious, and for some people that's not aligned for them. So I think, I think most of us start with Codependent No More and the Codependent No More workbook. I think that that can be really helpful. And then from there, like that you can go to online Coda meetings, like hop into some meetings. One thing that I do think is really helpful about Coda meetings is, for one thing, they're free. And so there's nothing better than that in terms of a resource for help. Not everyone can afford therapy, but you can hop into a free meeting. But for me, the most beneficial thing was sitting and listening to stories from people who, huge age difference, huge life experience difference, socioeconomic class, like all these differences, but we all seemed so similar in our emotional processing. And that was very helpful for me to be like, oh, right, like this idea that this is a predictable outcome of certain childhood circumstances or life circumstances, that it's not just that I'm crazy, right? That like we all have this. And I was like, oh, this is a thing our brains and our bodies do. And
Mm-hmm.
that to be really helpful, just to break out sometimes of the story that like I alone am so wounded and so messed up. It's like, no, no, no. Look at all these people who are going through this thing. And so I do find like Coda can, even if you only go to a couple meetings, just to normalize it for yourself, I think it can be really helpful.
It's so underestimated, the power of just knowing it's collective and hearing other people's stories. And I love that as just a foot in the door, right? Free option. I even think of Instagram accounts, that speak to this and tell stories and just anything to help you dissolve that shame of I am crazy or bad or alone in this is huge. And you talked about, the brain and the body, right? I know for me, I learned so friggin' much about codependency, and I needed to do that at first, right? It was like my foundation, it was where I started, but I did reach a point where I was spinning my wheels and feeling like, why am I not growing anymore? Why do I still feel stuck on this? Why could I, write my own book on codependency at this point, but not be able to actually feel different in the way that I'm showing up in my relationship? And for me, it was getting into the body to move trauma out, learning that our body keeps the score of all of this, and all the head knowledge in the world is really nice. But if you've filled up on all of that and you're still feeling stuck, maybe time to bring in, the body.
Absolutely. And I think that, that's true for all healing work. And I also think that's one of the reasons people get stuck in their healing journey forever and ever, is they intellectually understand all these things and they have all these concepts. I know that was true for me. Like, and I'm a smarty pants. And I think for smart people, it's the worst, because being really smart, doing a lot of talk therapy means that you're really good at describing all of the things going on, but it doesn't necessarily, like, I have an air moon for my astrology people too. Like, I process my emotions all intellectually. Like, the idea that thinking about your experience and being able to describe it is not the same as feeling your feelings was like a big attack for me. I was like, how dare you?
I feel very
Uh,
seen.
I don't like that. Um, so I think also, right, when we're talking about changing how we be, because this is a behavioral pattern, it's not just a mental thing. This is a way of being with people. And we can be codependent at work. We can be codependent with our children. We can be codependent in romantic partnerships, especially. We can be codependent with family members. Most people who are codependent have a codependent structure enabled in their family. Either they are the codependent for addicts in their family, or everyone in their family is enmeshed and has codependency. So recognizing that when you start changing how you're being in relationships. First of all, a lot of your relationships are going to change. That's the part that for a lot of people keeps them where they are, because they recognize that like family relationships will fall apart if they start having boundaries, because they have family members who will not take kindly to you starting to say no, or say, I can't talk about this topic with you, or I can't show up for you in this way, I can't support you like this. That they have friendships or romantic partnerships that will have to dissolve when they change how they're functioning. And so I think that the creating safety part, getting into your body, recognizing that your healing may also come with grief and loss and like new things that you have to heal from, and that we have to build our capacity to tolerate that discomfort. And so it makes sense that for a lot of us, like we didn't feel safe enough to start doing the healing, because on some level we knew, I'm not ready to let go of this relationship, or I'm not ready to like do this battle with my whole family that I know I'm going to have to do when I start setting boundaries. And like we have to be in a pretty good resourced place in our life and start to act like, right, like I need to live somewhere safe, I need to have some financial security. There are a lot of things that probably need to be in place to feel safe enough to start changing the behavior. And so then when we're getting into the behavioral change part in the body, I think a simple question that we can start asking ourselves, and this one has been really good for me, is am I giving to get, or am
Mm.
I giving to give? And so a lot of times when we're in codependency, we're giving to get, and we don't realize that. But what we're getting is, I will calm down, I will feel better. We might be exasperated. Oh, just let me handle this thing for you. I have to handle everything. But what are we getting out of that? We get to perpetuate the story that we're the responsible one. We get to know that the thing is handled, which is actually what we're freaking out about because we want control. Right? Like there's something that we're going to get out of this thing that we're giving. And so checking myself a lot for my motivations for my quote unquote generosity, or my checking in, or my helping, and being like, am I really being selfless? Is this really coming from a place of pure generosity? And like and it's mixed, right? Because yes, I'm a generous person, I'm kind, I care about other people's well-being, I care about the people in my life. But sometimes I had to get really honest with myself and be like, oh, I'm like 80% doing this because it will make me feel better to know that it is done, or to like see that it's been handled, or to, right? Like there's something I'm going to get out of this. And then when we can do that, right? That moment between stimulus and response. There's a stimulus, I want to jump in. I have the presence of mind now to take a beat, to say, let me call you back in 5 minutes, to say, let me let you know tomorrow, right? Like to create some space for yourself to go tap in with your body, to breathe, to journal a little bit and kind of ask yourself what's going on. And then to maybe feel into, like literally put your hands on your body and be like, what feels unsafe about this for me right now?
Mm.
If you use EFT, that's another method that I love. I love tapping because, again, it's free. You can just do it with your body. You can hop onto YouTube and search like tapping for anxiety, tapping for fear, and you can just follow along with someone tapping. See if you can, write, like, show your body, I'm not actually unsafe right now. My life will not actually be jeopardized if this person is upset that I say no to them, right? I'm actually okay. I have a course, and I'll give you the link for this. It's a pay what you can. People can grab it for $1. It's called The Art of Saying Yes Less. And it has a whole, I call it the yes detox. And then it has scripts in it for saying no. Because for a lot of people, they're like, I'm so not used to even setting boundaries or saying no. I don't know what to say. How do I say it nicely? I'm like really afraid of how they're going to respond. So there's like scripts, and there's like guided meditation in there to make saying no feel safe in your body. Um, but like it will take like practice, literal practice. It's not going to be something that now that you know you can change. It's going to take behavioral intervention, the same way of like, okay, I used to order alcohol when I was out with friends, and now I order sparkling water. There's like something that happens where I think it and I want to, and I feel desire in my body, and I have to regulate myself. And then when the waiter comes, I have to say a different thing. Like there's like a physical thing that happens in the real world that we have to practice. And over time, like at the beginning, it might be like, oh my God, are you saying I have to like take a beat and do this check-in like multiple times a day? Like probably.
At first,
But
yeah.
time, it will that way, and like it'll get more automatic and you'll get more comfortable. You'll start to have more and more evidence in your body that like I can say no to someone or I can set a boundary with someone and they can be upset and like the sun still comes out and my mom still loves me and like everything's okay.
Sarah, that was such a fire hose of gold, all of that. I definitely want to put the link in the show notes. But everything you just said was like, I want people to just save that the last 5 minutes and replay it if they need to over and over again to ingrain into their mind. Oh gosh, I could talk to you all day about codependency, but we'll just have to do a part two. And I know you're coming into our client group. But before we end our conversation today, I would love to unpack a little this fantasy addiction idea. Again, top level definition. How do you define fantasy addiction?
Okay, so I love this too because I also don't hear people talk, oh, a hummingbird just showed up. It's a good omen. Um, so I also don't hear this talked about the way that I think it's really important to talk about because I think a lot of codependents have fantasy addiction and don't know it. I like to call fantasy addiction codependency plus or spicy codependency because it's good to make it light. um, I think it's important to note that all fantasy addicts are codependent, but not all codependents are fantasy addicts. And so I think that that's like a helpful thing to know. Like you can be codependent and not be a fantasy addict, but it's unlikely if you have fantasy love addiction that you are not also a codependent. So fantasy love addiction. It's called love addiction, but I prefer to call it fantasy addiction because that's more accurate. We're not addicted to love. The thing that we're experiencing is not love. What is happening is that we get into relationships with people and we very quickly create a projection of that person in our mind. So when you hear people talk about how like women fall in love with potential, a lot of people are fantasy addicts, right? So you have this idea of what the relationship could be and how great it could be and who this person could be in your life. And you almost immediately check out of what is and what's happening and like noticing noticing red flags, noticing the person's real behavior, noticing how you really feel, because you're almost entirely engaged in your own fantasy of who the person is. What this frequently coincides with is if you study attachment theory, it can also really coincide with the anxious and avoidant cycle, and it can be part of the codependent narcissist love trap. So if you are someone prone to fantasy addiction and codependency, and you meet someone who love bombs you at the beginning of a relationship, that feels really good to your nervous system because what feels unsafe in the nervous system of someone who is anxiously attached and or codependent and or fantasy addict is the period of uncertainty where you're like, I like you and we have not committed to each other yet. That's a lot of uncertainty to navigate, to have to regulate your own nervous system and be like, I'm getting to know you. I'm figuring out if I like you. We may not end up together. That's something that someone with like a lot of self-worth, healthy boundaries, and a secure attachment style can navigate pretty easily. But for anxiously attached people, codependents, and fantasy addicts, that is incredibly dysregulating and uncomfortable because it feels really dangerous to know that I'm starting to really like you and you could pull this away from me. And so when someone shows up, let's go healthy first. Someone shows up with healthy pacing and they want to see you once a week and they don't text you all day every day, you might be like, do you hate me? This is so uncomfortable. Like, I want to see you every day. I want to text all the time. I want a lot of reassurance. So when someone shows up and they love bomb you and they want to see you every day and they want to text you all the time, also a lot of fantasy addicts think of ourselves as being super romantic. And we're like, I believe in this. I believe that love can happen really fast. I do know couples who met and like from the day they met, they were just together. That exists in the world. And like, maybe it's my turn and maybe this is happening for me and it feels so good. And we're actually getting a little bit of a high off of it. Now, here's where it transitions. We go into fantasizing about taking trips together, about getting married, about our children, about being together at Christmas, right? Like we start having this big fantasy future projection, and our high transfers over to the fantasy. So I get my high, my hit, my escapist moment from going into this fantasy. And I now need that fantasy because it's something, again, that I'm using to regulate my nervous system. So if I am having a hard day, I'm stressed out, things at work aren't going that well, I'm dealing with hard things, I can escape in my mind to fantasizing about this beautiful relationship that I'm creating in my mind. I can also then, when the relationship starts going poorly and cracks start appearing, go into spending all of my time analyzing what is this person doing? What are they thinking? What's really going on? What's happening? How can I kind of get it back on track? Obsessing about the relationship. That is now my addiction, my escape from reality, the thing that I'm focused on all the time that's taking me out of dealing with what's present in my day-to-day life. And so I think the addiction part is really important because this is like a process addiction, like gambling or like food, or like food can be more of a substance addiction, but frequently a process addiction, work addiction. These are like, you can get addicted to anything that you're using to escape from what's happening right now, from what's present. And fantasy addiction can be really sneaky because it can look like you're at work. It can look like you're with your friends. But if all the time in your head you are completely absorbed in thinking about this person, this relationship, and what's going on, and it's like you wake up thinking about it and go to bed thinking about it, you are kind of no longer attending to as many things in your life. You're canceling plans, you're giving up on things that are important to you, and getting completely absorbed in trying to maintain this relationship, then there's a really good chance that you're experiencing fantasy addiction. Um, and like with all 12 step, one of the keys is like my life has become unmanageable. That's one of those things that they say when you're in 12 step, like I had to recognize my life was becoming unmanageable. When you start recognizing that like you're spending so much time absorbed in thoughts of this relationship and this person, also usually you go from relationship to relationship and they're all very, very intense very quickly. And that was definitely me, my teens and my 20s. I had like never been single.
Yeah, hearing you say noticing you're absorbed in thoughts, that just reminds me of a flight response. If codependency is that fawn response, being so caught in our heads and escaping and, just constantly ruminating and going there can be a way of, like you said, leaving, escaping our body, the present, and trying to feel better, trying to soothe in some way what's really uncomfortable right here, right now. It's interesting as you were talking, I was just thinking about like I forget how much I've told you about my history, but I grew up in a very strict Christian household where purity culture was super high and the idea of fantasizing even about, a relationship, it was born and bred in me, ingrained in me that that was wrong, that that was bad. And so I had a lot of just like stuffed, repressed inability to naturally express and like feel into stuff and be able to integrate kind of where my mind wanted to
Where my
go,
mind
what's real. The reverb just did something weird, but we'll edit that. But I basically just forced myself and stuffed a lot of thoughts like that down before I was married, and then even when I was married, and then we were going through just massive ruptures in our relationship, broken vows, and wanting to think about ex-boyfriends or, this guy I worked with, like stopping myself kind of in a harsh, firm way, like, don't go there, that's bad, that's wrong. But then I would watch it come out in dreams. I don't know if you've, experienced this with yourself, your clients, but here I am thinking I'm doing, a good job stuffing it down, and heck no, it's going to go somewhere, right? It doesn't leave your body unless you like really learn how to move through these kinds of things and feel to heal and feel to deal. But yeah, I would have wild dreams, especially when my relationship was at its worst, like fantasy dreams with coworkers and explicit stuff that I'm like, terrible person. But what ended up being so potent to dissolve that, I remember, is just bringing it to light and safe places and getting a bunch of non-judgmental head nods from people that understood what I was going through and were able to help me see how natural this was, that I was in so much pain, that there was such a severe disconnection in my relationship, and I was wired to desire love and belonging, and of course, you're going to seek that out, whether in conscious waking hours or subconsciously when you're dreaming.
I'm so glad that you brought it up as a flight response because I think that's exactly right. And I want to again tie this to the idea of predictable outcomes from childhood. So if you grew up with Disney movies, with any of the like there's books, like from the time we're little, the idea that like love is what rescues you is very prominent in our culture, and everyone gets like exposed to these ideas. And I grew up in a home that was very chaotic. And I remember being 5 and being like, I want to move to New York. Like, I want to get out of here. Like, these people are nuts. When you're a child, you can't actually leave. You have no money, you have no agency, you have no autonomy. You can't leave the dangerous situation, but you can leave in your mind. And so being obsessed with ideas of like, I was always in my mind in love with somebody. Like, I have all my journals from when I was a kid, and I was just in love with somebody all the time. And I think that that was a big thing I could do to flee, to flight, to get out of there in my mind and go be somewhere else and ignore what was happening in my home and ignore what was happening in the immediate surroundings, because I was like, yeah, I'm here right now, but I'm not one of you. I'm not going to stay here. My life's not going to be like this. I'm going to go, I'm going to get married. I'm going to have my own family. I'm going to have a beautiful life, and it's going to be completely different from this. And so it was something that I think was probably my first addiction. And I think it started when I was a little kid. And it makes a lot of sense that we would have this that our brains for us that like allows us to leave our immediate surroundings and move into something else in our mind to create some distance and some safety for ourselves. So again, just like codependency, it's like these are really predictable adaptive safety strategies that we create in order to be okay, and they make sense when we're kids and then they are not helpful when we're adults.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend recently who grew up similar to you, just in well, not chaos for this person, but their household was just emotionally not really available from his parents. He didn't feel seen, heard. There was definitely emotional neglect. And so pretty early on, he discovered porn and over his lifetime developed a pretty intense pornography addiction that escalated to levels that was, hurting his family and his job, and it got out of control. And there was always so much shame that, charged this whole realization. We were just talking about it, and we were talking about the wisdom of that survival mechanism as a little kid, that he was able to do exactly what you just said, leave the situation when he was feeling that lack of love and belonging and the pain that came from that. But that's just very countercultural, at least in the spaces I run into when it comes to addictions, having a strong church background that's seen as very bad. So the shame only fuels it, and it feels very revolutionary, very different, very scary, even to even consider befriending that and honoring that as like a wise way that you adapted. So I just love your view on all of this. And as we land this plane, Cera, when it comes to the fantasy addiction, which most people, call love addiction, but I like how you is there anything else that you think is important for people to understand? Or if they identify with this, what are some practical steps that they can take towards healing?
I think fantasy addiction is a challenging one in some ways. I mean, all the codependency healing stuff will help. One of the things that I do when I work with people in general on everything, whether it's like boundaries, codependency, fantasy addiction, body image stuff, a lot of what I'm focused with people on is increasing the pleasure in their lives. Um, because most of the time, what we're talking about, right, even in the example of your friend, we're talking about an extreme pleasure deficit. We're talking about a deficit of joy, a deficit of things that make me feel good. And we want to feel good. That is a normal human thing. We want to feel good. We want to feel safe. We want to feel loved. We want dopamine. Like we are wired to feel good. And so unfortunately, both coming from like kind of puritanical religious culture, but also it's seeped now into so many aspects of our lives and of our culture. We really have this emphasis on abstinence and taking things away and refraining from doing things. But the problem with that is if this is your only source of pleasure and I try to take it away, that's not going to work. If this is the only thing in your life that's bringing you some semblance of joy, even if it also hurts you, I can't take it away from you. And so, what we can do instead is we can start focusing on how to increase pleasure in every other area of your life. Let's really look at like, are you happy with your work? Do you feel fulfilled? Do you feel purposeful in these other areas? Are you happy in your relationships? Do you feel loved? Do you have good friendships? Do you eat food that lights you up? Do you wear clothes that you enjoy? Like every single aspect of your life, no matter how small, can we amp up the pleasure in all these other areas first so that it's easier to start looking at maybe I don't need this as much. Maybe this is not right. Like when we're really happy with our lives, I know when I look back on the fantasy relationships that I was in when I was younger, I wasn't super happy with my life. I wasn't happy where I was. I wasn't happy with my financial situation. I wasn't happy in my career. I wasn't happy with my friendships. I wasn't even happy in that relationship. And so retreating to the fantasy made sense because that was the thing I was deriving some pleasure from. But when you start amping up pleasure in other areas of your life, some of those relationships just won't even be appealing to you anymore because you're a different version of yourself. You're a happier person. And so I think that finding someone to work with who first and foremost recognizes that what you're doing isn't bad and wrong and something you have to stop. What you're doing, I like one of my core beliefs as a healer and as a coach is that every single thing we do makes perfect sense, right? Like I don't believe in self-sabotage. I only believe in self-protection. Like everything we're doing makes sense on some emotional nervous system level, even if we don't understand consciously what it is right now. So we have to figure out what's going on and why this is serving you, right? One of my favorite questions, instead of asking yourself, why am I like this or why is this like this, is to ask, why do I like this? Because there's something you're getting out of it and there's a reason you do like it. Even if it feels uncomfortable, but there's a part of you that likes it, that gets a payoff. And so starting to recognize, like, what do I get out of this? Is it safety? Is it pleasure? Even if it's like a perverse kind of pleasure, like biting your nails, right? Like there's something I get out of this and I need it right now. So what do I do to not need it as much? And so get with someone who understands that what you're doing is a bid for survival and for happiness and can help support you through finding actual safety and actual happiness and then slowly titrating out of these behaviors and recognizing if you have fantasy addiction that it is probably comorbid with codependency, and so your fantasy relationships usually are also are codependent relationships, because in order to keep the fantasy going you do have to make excuses for this other person's bad behavior and do all of this stuff to keep that relationship going. So there's going to be big changes, and some of them are not going to be pleasant, and probably periods of profound sadness and profound grief, um, for the things that you're going to have to let go of, the things that you're going to have to change, the ways of being that you're going to have to give up, and also probably for your childhood. right? Like most of us have to go through some series of like profound grief for what we went through growing up that like led us here. Even if we love our parents and think that they did their best, there's some stuff we're going to have to like really look at and sit with and heal. So find someone who you trust to like be with you through a lot of change and a lot of big feelings.
So good. I don't believe in self-sabotage. I believe in self-protection. Mic drop. And then rather than why am I like this, ask why do I like this? Yeah, figuring out what's the core need I'm trying to seek right now, because we all have valid human core needs, and it's constantly everything we're doing a bid for survival and happiness. I love that. And I completely agree, could not agree more with the idea of slowly titrating, not demonizing or cutting any addiction off, whatever it is. I've just seen it. I've seen it too much time and time again in so many people in my life, myself, my clients, that when you are trying to cut out whatever behavior you no longer want, if it's a hard stop and just cutting it all off, it doesn't work. It doesn't last. It might work for a time. So
This
on
reminds me, there is one thing I do want to share about that cutting it all off thing. The In the same way that the pendulum swing of like addictive overeating is anorexia, like you can go from one extreme to the other without healing the core issue, and it looks like you've given up the behavior, but you've just shifted the addiction. In love addiction and fantasy addiction, the opposite is actually love anorexia. And a really common thing for love addicts when they're going through big breakups is to be like, I'm just going to stop dating altogether because I can't do this anymore. And I used to always think that and be like, I don't want to end up one of those people who just swears off of love and relationships. That is actually a good sign that you might need to look at fantasy addiction, because you can't conceive of healthy relationships. You only know that like every relationship I have is this completely engrossing thing that really hurts me. And so you want to swing completely the other way and just cut all relationships off because that's the only way you can see out of it. But again, that doesn't heal the core issue. And if you ever do love addiction meetings, you will end up in meetings with fantasy addicts and with love anorexics, because they're two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, so the core, what would get to the root more, I think, is that question you posed of why do I like this, and getting to that, as well as, just on that deep level, what am I seeking? What wound am I avoiding again? Because our body does remember every wound that we've been through if we haven't, been able to release that or complete that. And
And
so asking yourself, why do I like this? And what hurt am I trying to avoid? What hurt is my nervous system wisely preparing and revving up to keep me from feeling again? And that's when you can really have some progress. So, Cera, this has been a joy. Such a joy to talk with you again. Where can people find you if they want to follow you, get to know you more? Tell the people where you're at.
yeah, I am on YouTube at Intuitive Edge Coaching. I have an Instagram, but I'm not active on Instagram this year. I'm taking an Instagram break, which is delightful. Also, I taught a workshop for someone in their program on fantasy addiction and codependency, and that whole workshop now is on my YouTube channel. So I'll give you that link if people want like to go way deeper. I can give you that as well. And then my website is intuitiveedgecoaching.com, and I'll give you that art of saying yes less. Of course, people can grab it for $1. I made it, and it's just like I want people to have this information, so I just made it pay what you can, starting at $1, so you can grab that. I'm on Facebook. I'm around. I'm here. I'm in all the places. I would love to talk with you. If you heard this and you want help, I would love to help you.
Yeah. And then how about your podcast?
Oh, yeah. My podcast is called Elemental Entrepreneurship. So it's way more on the business side. If you're listening to this and you don't run a business, it might not be for you, but there are also a lot of interviews. Becky was on my podcast. There are a lot of interviews with amazing people, healers, teachers that are not all about business. So look for water and spirit episodes, and those will probably be more up your alley if you're not a business owner. But if you are a business owner, you're going to become one. Listen to all of it.
So good. Well, thank you, friend, for your time today. I love chatting with you, and I cannot wait for this to air.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much.